Listen carefully to that sound. That deep twin-engine roar cutting through the frozen Ontario night. That isn't an American jet. It isn't British. It isn't borrowed, licensed, or bought off a foreign shelf. What you're hearing is Canadian. Entirely Canadian. It is 1953. The Cold War is no longer a theory. It is a loaded gun, and it is pointed directly at North America. From the north, Soviet bombers, sleek and nuclear-armed, were being built to exploit a single geographical fact Western strategists quietly feared. The shortest flight path from the Soviet Union to the industrial heart of the United States doesn't cross the Atlantic Ocean. It crosses Canada. It crosses frozen tundra, magnetic interference so dense it blinds early radar, temperatures that kill exposed skin in minutes, and hundreds of miles of the most hostile airspace on Earth. The Americans had fast jets. So did the British. But speed alone doesn't stop a bomber you can't find in a blizzard, in the dark at 40,000 feet, over the Arctic. Canada looked at this problem, this terrifying, uniquely Canadian problem, and made a decision that by modern standards seems almost impossible to believe. They didn't call Washington. They didn't call London. They picked up the phone and called Moulton, Ontario, and that decision would echo across 2 continents. What followed was one of the most extraordinary feats of independent aerospace engineering in the 20th century. A sovereign nation, barely 8 years removed from the Second World War, designed and built a world-class, twin-engine, all-weather heavy interceptor entirely from scratch, and then exported it. Belgium purchased 53 CF-100s and flew them as frontline interceptors. This is the story of the Avro Canada CF-100 Canuck. And it's the story of a Canada the world has almost forgotten. But to understand why that Canada existed at all, you have to go back to a single moment, a single detonation, that changed the strategic reality of the entire planet. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, and the Cold War's danger became real. In Washington, the shock is profound. The American nuclear monopoly, the ultimate guarantee of Western security, is gone. Just 4 years after the end of the Second World War, the world has lurched into a new and more dangerous era, and every assumption military planners had quietly relied on is now obsolete. For Canada, the implications are immediate and deeply personal. Look at a globe, not a flat map, but a globe, and trace the most direct route from Soviet bomber bases in Siberia and the Kola Peninsula to the industrial cities of the American Midwest: Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, the steel mills, the refineries, the factories that had powered the Allied war machine. That direct route, the great circle path that geography and physics dictate, passes directly over the Canadian Arctic, over the Yukon, over the Northwest Territories, over thousands of miles of frozen wilderness so remote that entire mountain ranges had barely been surveyed. Canada wasn't a buffer. It was the highway to North America. The Royal Canadian Air Force understood this with perfect clarity, and they understood something else too, something the Americans and British, for all their air power, had not yet fully grappled with. The Arctic is not simply cold. It is operationally hostile in ways that defeat conventional military aircraft before they ever meet the enemy. Consider the jets available in the late 1940s. The Americans had the F-86 Sabre, a beautiful, nimble, single-engine dayfighter. The British had the Vampire, fast, capable, single-engine aircraft, proven in combat doctrine, designed for European skies, for daytime engagements, for airfields surrounded by navigational infrastructure. None of that existed in the Canadian North. Single-engine aircraft over the Arctic carried a death sentence with them every time they flew. One engine failure, one bird strike, one fuel contamination, one mechanical fault. And the pilot wasn't facing a forced landing on a friendly runway. He was facing an uncontrolled descent into terrain so remote that search and rescue was measured not in hours, but in days. In winter, exposure kills in minutes. The tundra doesn't negotiate. Beyond the survival equation, there was the operational reality of weather. Arctic flying means instrument flying. It means navigating through cloud and darkness and magnetic anomalies so severe that compasses become unreliable. It means radar. Real, powerful, nose-mounted radar. capable of finding a fast-moving bomber in zero visibility at altitude. A single-seat day fighter, however fast, is blind in those conditions. You cannot intercept what you cannot find. What Canada needed was something that didn't exist on any Allied inventory. Not a dogfighter, not a fair-weather sprinter. Canada needed a heavy twin-engine interceptor, 2 crew members, a pilot and a dedicated radar operator, working together in a heated cockpit designed for extended Arctic operations. Enough fuel range to patrol meaningful distances. Enough redundancy in its power plant that a single failure wasn't a death sentence. Canada needed, in short, a purpose-built Arctic weapons system. And when they surveyed the catalogues of their allies and found nothing that fit, the answer became inevitable. If no one had built it yet, Canada would build it themselves. And the organization that would carry that weight was already waiting. Avro Canada, officially the Avro Canada Limited, had been established in Moulton, Ontario, just northwest of Toronto, in the final years of the Second World War. By the late 1940s, it had grown into something remarkable, a world-class aerospace engineering firm operating on Canadian soil, staffed by some of the most brilliant aeronautical minds on the planet, many of them recruited from post-war Britain, many of them homegrown Canadian talent that the world had not yet learned to take seriously. They were about to give the world a reason. The design requirement issued to Avro Canada was uncompromising. The new aircraft had to operate in all weather, day or night. It had to carry a dedicated radar operator alongside the pilot. It had to be twin-engine, non-negotiable, given everything the Arctic demanded. It had to house a radar system powerful enough to locate Soviet bombers at altitude through cloud and darkness. And it had to be built using Canadian engines. That last requirement was not symbolic. It was strategic. Canada had no intention of building a sovereign interceptor only to depend on foreign power plants that could be withheld, delayed, or discontinued at another nation's discretion. So alongside the airframe program, Avro's engine division, which would eventually become Orenda Engines, developed the Orenda turbojet, and what they produced was extraordinary. The Orenda was not a licensed copy of an existing design. It was an original Canadian engine, and by the time it reached maturity, upon its introduction, it ranked among the most powerful turbojets in the world, competitive with anything being produced in Britain or the United States. 2 of them would power the CF-100. The airframe that emerged from Moulton was large, purposeful, and utterly indifferent to elegance. This was not a sleek, needle-nosed machine designed to inspire awe on an airshow poster. The CF-100 had straight wings, broad, strong, and functional, optimized not for maximum speed but for stability at altitude, and in the kind of brutal instrument conditions that would have torn a more delicate aircraft apart. The nose was dominated by a massive radome housing the APG-33 radar system, giving the aircraft its distinctive, blunt, purposeful profile. Crews who flew and maintained her found the nickname that fit. They called her the Clunk, not with contempt, with affection. The kind of affection you develop for something that is heavy and stubborn and unglamorous and will absolutely, reliably bring you home. Inside that cockpit, the pilot and radar operator sat in tandem, surrounded by systems designed for extended operations in some of the coldest, most navigation-hostile airspace on Earth. This was a weapons platform built around its mission, rather than a mission built around the weapons platform. The CF-100 would carry rockets, initially the unguided Mighty Mouse folding-fin aerial rockets, dozens of them housed in a ventral pack and wingtip pods, optimized to saturate the flight path of an incoming bomber. It did not need to be a graceful duelist. It needed to find the enemy in the dark and destroy it before it reached the cities below. But then came the moment that silenced every remaining skeptic. On the 18th of December 1952, Avro test pilot Jan Zurakowski pushed a CF-100 into a steep dive and exceeded Mach 1, the first straight-wing jet ever to breach the sound barrier. Let that register. A heavy, twin-engine, straight-winged interceptor, designed to hunt bombers over the frozen Canadian Arctic, had just done something that aeronautical engineers elsewhere had insisted a straight-wing jet couldn't do. Canada had not just built a capable aircraft. Canada had built a machine that defied expectations, and the world was about to find out exactly what that machine could do in service. It would find out in two places simultaneously, one vast and frozen and largely invisible to the public eye, and one squarely in the center of the most strategically important piece of real estate on Earth. First came the North. Beginning in 1953, CF-100 Canucks began flowing into Royal Canadian Air Force squadrons tasked with the most demanding and least celebrated mission in Western military aviation, the round-the-clock, all-weather interception patrol of the Canadian Arctic. This was not glamorous work. There were no crowds, no cameras, no headlines. There was radar. There was darkness. There was cold so absolute that ground crews worked in conditions that would shut down a modern airport without hesitation, keeping aircraft armed, fueled and combat-ready, regardless of what the weather threw at them. RCAF squadrons stationed at bases stretching from Bagotville in Quebec to uplands in Ontario, to the remote northern postings that sat closest to the threat axis, flew their Canucks through conditions that grounded every other operational jet in the Western inventory. When ice storms rolled in off Hudson Bay, the CF-100 launched anyway. When visibility dropped to near zero and temperatures plunged past the point where exposed metal became brittle, the crews strapped in anyway. That was the entire point. The Soviet bomber threat did not pause for weather. Neither would Canada's response to it. The CF-100's radar operator, sitting behind the pilot, eyes locked onto his scope, was the critical element that transformed the aircraft from a fast machine into a true all-weather system. Together, pilot and operator worked as a single organism. The radar found the target in the dark. The pilot prosecuted the intercept. The rockets did the rest. It was cold, methodical, and devastatingly effective, a system designed not for the thrill of aerial combat, but for the grim, necessary business of ensuring that no Soviet bomber ever reached Canadian or American soil uncontested. But the story of the CF-100 in service does not end at the Arctic Circle. It doesn't even end at the Canadian border, because while the Canucks were standing watch over the frozen north, NATO was confronting a crisis that Canada, almost uniquely, was positioned to solve. By the mid-1950s, the North Atlantic Alliance had built a formidable conventional air defense across Western Europe. American and British fighter squadrons were stationed across West Germany, the Low Countries and France, ready to contest Soviet air power over the Central European plain. By day, that coverage was credible. The Canadair-built F-86 Sabre, flown by RCAF pilots as part of No. 1 Air Division based in France and West Germany, was among the finest day fighters in the Alliance inventory. Canada's Sabre squadrons were considered some of the best in NATO, and their reputation was earned, not assigned. But night fell, and when it did, the picture changed dramatically. The Americans and British simply did not have enough capable all-weather and night fighter aircraft to cover the full NATO requirement. The threat of Soviet night bombing raids and bad weather penetration attacks against Western European targets was real, and the gap in the Alliance's nocturnal defenses was a vulnerability that Soviet planners had certainly identified. NATO needed aircraft that could operate in the dark and the murk, aircraft with real radar, real range, and real lethality after sunset. Canada had exactly that aircraft, so Canada sent it. 4 CF-100 squadrons, numbers 428, 423, 440 and 432, deployed to Europe as part of RCAF No. 1 Air Division, integrating directly into the NATO air defense network. The arrangement was elegant in its completeness. By day, Canadian Sabres patrolled the skies over Western Europe alongside their American and British allies. By night, Canadian Canucks took over, their radar noses sweeping the darkness, their Orenda engines pulling them to altitude through cloud and rain, and the kind of European winter weather that tested every aircraft and every crew. Canada was not a junior partner filling a secondary role. Canada was providing a capability that the Alliance's two dominant air powers could not fully supply themselves. The nation that occupied the Arctic highway between the Soviet Union and the United States had now extended its shield across the Atlantic, becoming the nighttime guardian of Western Europe at the precise moment when that guardianship was most desperately needed. No. 1 Air Division at its peak represented one of the most powerful and capable tactical air forces in the NATO alliance. 12 squadrons of frontline aircraft, all of them Canadian crewed, most of them flying Canadian-built machines. At a time when Canada's total population was barely 15 million people, This country was projecting air power across two continents simultaneously. That is not the behavior of a middle power managing modest ambitions. That is the behavior of a nation that had decided, with complete seriousness, to be great. A nation that had decided with complete seriousness to be great, and the world, not just Canada's allies, not just NATO planners who had learned to rely on the Canuck's capabilities, but the open international market noticed, because there is a particular kind of validation that no government contract, no alliance commitment, and no internal review board can manufacture. It is the validation that comes when a foreign nation, with no obligation whatsoever, with access to the full range of what the world's aerospace industry has to offer, looks at what you have built and reaches for their checkbook. Belgium reached for theirs. In the mid-1950s, the Belgian Air Force was in the market for a serious, capable, all-weather interceptor. They surveyed their options across the Western world, American designs, British designs, everything available to a NATO nation with genuine resources and genuine requirements, and their conclusion was unambiguous. They ordered 53 CF-100 Canucks for the Belgian Air Force, operating them as frontline interceptors in their own national defense. Think carefully about what that means. A total of 692 CF-100s were built, the largest production run of any indigenous jet aircraft in Canadian history, and of those, 53 flew the roundel of a European sovereign nation that had chosen Canadian engineering over every alternative on the market. The CF-100 remains, to this day, the only fully Canadian-designed jet fighter ever to enter operational service with a foreign air force. No other Canadian-designed combat jet has achieved that distinction before or since. Belgium didn't buy it out of courtesy. They bought it because it was the best available tool for the job. But perhaps the most remarkable chapter of the CF-100 story is not how it was born, or what it achieved at its peak. It is how long it refused to die. As the 1960s arrived and aviation technology accelerated rapidly, the sleek, supersonic single-engine fighters of the era were cycled through inventories with increasing speed, rendered obsolete by advancing threats, replaced, retired, and consigned to museum plinths within a decade of their introduction. The clunk had other ideas. The CF-100's strong airframe made it ideal for a new role, electronic warfare, jamming and signals intelligence. So capable was the aircraft in this role, so sound its bones, that the Canadian Armed Forces kept the CF-100 in active service until 1981, more than 30 years after its first flight, well into the jet age's second generation. It outlasted almost every comparable aircraft from its era, and it did so not through nostalgia, but through genuine, continued operational utility. The clunk earned that nickname twice over, once for the sound it made, and once for the sheer, stubborn refusal to be anything less than essential. A refusal to be anything less than essential. That quality, stubborn, quietly confident, uninterested in external validation, was not unique to the aircraft. It belonged to the country that built it. For a brief, brilliant window in the 1950s and early 1960s, Canada was something the world rarely acknowledges, and Canadians themselves rarely pause to celebrate. A genuine aerospace superpower, not by accident, not by proximity to a larger ally, but by deliberate national will, by investment in engineering excellence, and by the absolute conviction that a country of Canada's geography and responsibility could not afford to be dependent on others for its own defense. We designed the engines and the airframe. We trained the crews, built the factories, earned the export contracts, and deployed the squadrons to two continents to guard a civilization that was holding its breath against the possibility of nuclear annihilation. Today, Canada waits years in line to purchase jets designed and built in foreign factories, to defend the same Arctic skies that Canadian engineers once built a sovereign solution to protect. That contrast is worth noting. The CF-100 Canuck does not ask for reverence. It never did. It was too busy flying in weather that grounded everyone else to concern itself with recognition. But we should remember it. We should remember what it represents, not as a relic, but as a standard, proof, in aluminum and Orenda fire, that Canada once chose to build for itself, and for a moment in history, it held it. This has been the Canadian legacy.